Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar hosted by Brennan IT and Moncast. The topic today is about reducing risks to email in Office 365 and other actual email platforms for that matter. It's a very Office 365 world we live in today. Many of you are already using that as your primary business productivity tool, including email. And along with that, there are some risk considerations with security. And today, Moncast is here to talk to us. If you don't know who Moncast is a specialist email security, business continuity and compliance company, very much focused on Office 365 and enhancing the security elements that Office 365 already presents to you as end users. So today what we're going to do is go through an overview of Moncast, how it works, what it does, the benefits to yourselves. In terms of the content that we'll be presenting today, this entire webinar will be recorded and the slides will also be presented to you tomorrow at the latest. Just a brief introduction to ourselves. Myself, who's speaking, Lincoln DeMello. If I haven't met you before, I'm the Cloud Practice Director here at Brennan IT, and presenting alongside with me is Garrett O'Hara, who's also known as Gar, and he's a Senior Technical Consultant from Moncast Australia. And Gar will be running the majority of the content today and going deep diving and showing you some demos at the same time. Before we get started on the content itself, just a few housekeeping things. And for those of you who are familiar with GoToWebinar, just be aware that no one will be able to actually ask questions via panel, and just type in your questions there. They'll all be logged and we'll get to them at the end after we've finished going through the content and the demos. If you do have any audio issues and you're joining in just via voice over IP through your PC, just dial in via the phone numbers that have been provided, and that should fix that up. Okay, so without further ado, let me just hand over to Gar now and we'll get started on the content.
Thanks, Lincoln. So to open today, really kind of, I suppose a good starting point, given it's around Office 365, is just to talk a little bit in terms of what we're kind of seeing and what everybody's seeing in terms of adoption of that as a platform. Huge numbers. So the last call from Microsoft, they outlined 85 million corporate users currently on Office 365 right now. And they have a 40% growth rate year on year. So by next year, we're probably looking at somewhere around 120 million users sitting on that platform. So as a platform, this is a really huge suite of interconnected services. But when Gartner kind of looked at why people adopted the platform, by far the biggest driver and the #1 reason why organizations are moving to Office 365 is around email. So that idea of offloading some of the cost and the management overhead that traditionally exists with the on-prem approach to email management, and bringing that into the Office 365 platform, where I think the experience for most people is that it's just an excellent platform in terms of email management. So, with that move, I think there's sometimes a perception that the responsibilities for business goes away in terms of, what do you do in terms of security? And if you look at the on-premises approach, traditionally people business can continue working, and if something happened to the Exchange server, that the data could be recovered from some sort of an archiving solution. And today we're going to, I suppose, focus on the Office 365 platform, but talk in broader terms around that idea of data resilience, or cyber resilience, I should say. And that idea that there's really kind of 3 core responsibilities that most organizations will still have, and that's around that idea of securing the perimeter, securing the organization, and securing email, making sure that the data is always available. So regardless if there's a breach or if there's an attack, that you can get back to that data. And this is probably quite topical given the WannaCry outbreak over the weekend, and some of the sort of fallout that we're seeing in terms of businesses not being able to access corporate data, and email would be part of that. And then that last part of the cyber resilience is around operational continuity or business continuity, and that idea that if something does happen, and traditionally that would have been with an Exchange server on premises, with Office 365, that potential still does exist. It's probably reduced in many cases, but for organizations to think about, what does it mean for them if that platform becomes unavailable for whatever reason, or there's a degradation in service? How do they continue sending and receiving emails and access to that as a communications channel? So that's kind of the context of what we'll talk about today. I'm going to drill into a little bit of detail across those kind of three areas and really open with security. The approach we'll take in the webinar today is to cover off at a kind of high level what we're talking about in terms of security. And then I'll do a jump into some of the technology and some of the things that Moncast is doing to protect our customers in partnership with Brennan IT. But really, in terms of security, email is still the biggest vector for attacks. So the stats from multiple surveys will all kind of say that plus 90% of successful breaches will start with an email. And that's because the people on the end of an email address are not necessarily technically savvy. They're not security trained. They're just people going about their they could be lawyers, they could be PAs, they could be who knows, but they're not necessarily tech savvy or security savvy people. So it's a very easy way into breaching an organization. If you look at organizations like PhishMe and those simulated phishing attack companies, their stats will support some scary kind of statistics. That idea that of the phishing emails that get sent into an organization, you'll see somewhere around 30% of those will get opened. And that actually happens pretty quickly. The median time for somebody clicking on a link is 1 minute and 22 seconds. So you've got very little time to actually do anything to protect your organization. With Office 365, there is also the notion that everybody's on the same platform. So you're basically putting not your eggs in one basket, but you're putting your eggs in the same basket as everybody else. So that single kind of vendor, that idea of monoculture SaaS, can potentially be a security consideration and something that many organizations are looking to address. So to dig into that in a little bit of detail, the approach with something like Moncast is that best practice layering of security still exists, still important with that move to Office 365. So that idea that you'll put something in place, in this case Moncast, and all the primary checks, those traditional secure email gateway checks will all still happen. So your AV, your AS using stacked engines, catering for complex routing control. When we see organizations that are moving to Office 365, quite often they'll have hybrid infrastructure. Things like recipient validation, so all those kind of primary checks. Where we're seeing most of the conversations happen these days are around what we call threat and content analysis. And that idea that the attacks that we're seeing today are much more sophisticated. There are things like malicious URLs coming through on OzPost emails, the AFP subpoena emails, utility bills is quite a common one. You'll see weaponized attachments coming through where people will get a productivity file, so like a Word document or an Excel file, with a macro that, when enabled, will connect to a command and control center and compromise an organization. So if you're lucky, that's going to be something like a ransomware. And interestingly, that's the one that hits the news all the time. You know, there's big figures and big numbers associated with that. In reality, the sort of the malware that's attached to phishing attacks is generally split 50-50. So 50% of the time you'll see ransomware. The other 50% of the time you'll see something like a keylogger or a Trojan, and in some ways they're more nefarious. So the conversation is really around that advanced threat protection, and also recently around that idea of protecting against whaling attacks. So how do we do this? Well, with URLs, it's a fairly straightforward approach in terms of what we'll do is, as an email passes through the Moncast cloud, we're going to rewrite the link so that the employee gets their email, gets delivered down with a rewritten link, and I'll show you that in a moment in a demo. So what that means is when they click on that link, we can do a point of click check. In our case, we're using 11 engines to do that check across reputation, categorization. We do a deep web page analysis, which really equates to kind of a sandboxing approach in the cloud, making sure that what that employee has clicked on is safe and is okay to be delivered straight through to, or blocked if the site is deemed to be malicious. And we have an element of dynamic user awareness, which allows security teams, IT management to dovetail automated user awareness into that point of click check. So a percentage of the time, the user base will see what we call a speed bump, and just a message in their browser to think about what it looks like when you get a phishing email. So to kind of run through this and kind of show you guys what this looks like, I'm going to show the user experience first of all, and that idea that you'll see something like a Telstra bill come through, and often what you'll get is it's an overdue bill. They're trying to push those psychological buttons to get the user base frightened, and get them to click on a link so that their phone doesn't get cut off. When I hover over this link, what you'll notice is that it's got a proxied link, so Moncast is able to jump in there and do our checks first, but it also supports that idea of hover before you click, so you can see the domain that it's going to go to in the link. And when I click on that, what you're going to see is immediately the platform can jump in and protect me as an end user so I don't compromise the organization. The other version of that is that dynamic user awareness, where maybe 1 in 10 times, maybe 1 in 100 times, I'm going to see a user awareness message that's brandable. So it can be branded according to whatever your company colors and logos are. But that idea of introducing that that education, that point of action, we get really good feedback that that's an effective way to introduce herd immunity into the organization. So from a management perspective, the other side then is obviously looking at what actually is happening here. So, from a management reporting perspective, we have dashboards that support getting that visibility into the protection that's being applied from the gateway, with some simple things like the URL scan per day, which, as you can see here, can be indicative of targeted attacks. If you're looking at a company with an average or a normal high of maybe 9,000 URL scan per day, and then you get a day where there's 120,000 URLs being scanned, that can be indicative that something's happening that the security team needs to pay attention to. Being able to see the overall number of URLs that are malicious, that have been detected in the last 30 days from an organization, being able to see what URLs are being clicked most often, whether they're malicious or clean, and also getting a view into who are the top users that are clicking on these malicious links, and they often correlate to high-value targets within an organization. And we also support detailed logs. So for those organizations that want to drill into more detail and exactly what's happening within, in terms of malicious URLs, you can absolutely do that and drill into that. You could export them, start slicing and dicing in Excel. And we also support SIEM integration for organizations that are using Splunk or Logarithm or those kind of tools to correlate security information and logging information. So that's URLs. That's a huge vector. It's one of the ones that we see all the time. The second part of this is what we call weaponized attachments. And here we're talking in terms of things like Word files, Excel files, often used for productivity. So they need macros enabled, but you also need to make sure that they're safe and secure. The Moncast approach really follows directly to the Australian Signals Directorate recommendations from last year. And their first recommendation was around this top path here, which is what we call safe file format. And that's the idea that we can take a Word file and automatically convert it into a safe flat PDF format and deliver that immediately down to the employees and the staff. And what that means is that there's no latency, and the staff member gets the attachment immediately in a safe file format. They can, if they want to, then request that file from the sandbox if they do require an editable version, and at that point it will be sandboxed and delivered down to them. That can be implemented based on an Active Directory group. So we see that often where HR, for example, will get their attachments through in a PDF format, but maybe the finance team has Excel files with macros attached, and they maybe just need to go through sandboxing without the safe file format. So we can do both. We can do what we call preemptive sandboxing, this mode here, number one, or we can do safe file format transcription. So how that looks as an end user is really straightforward. And that idea that you'll get a attachment, and that attachment will be converted automatically to a PDF format. So there's nothing here that I can really do to put the business at risk. But if I want to, and I decide I need to have an original copy of that, I can very easily request the original file. And at that point, it will then sandbox the attachment and deliver down the original Word document if that's proved to be safe through the sandboxing technology. And what you'll get is an email like this, which will tell you that the attachment is safe, but also give you your Word doc, your Excel file, and whatever the whatever the file might be with the macro still enabled. And this is a very simple example that literally just has a message box, but just to drive home that point that the macro has been deemed safe. We've looked at the attachment in the sandbox. We know it's safe, so we can deliver it down to the employee. From a management perspective, within the administration console, which is that single pane of glass into email management, you do have an attachment protection dashboard. So again, very similar to the URL Protect dashboard, where you can see trending of how many sandbox attachments there are per day, how many attachments are deemed unsafe. And drilling down, you can see, again, correlation to often high-value targets within an organization, looking at who are the top unsafe files by recipients. And if you're really keen, you can kind of drill down and actually take a look at the reasons why potentially a file has been blocked within the sandbox results. So quite a bit of I suppose intel around the reasons for those files being blocked there. The last part, and this is probably one that is getting more and more common in the conversations that we're having, is around what we call impersonation protect. This is whaling attacks, CXO fraud, and that idea that we can pick up these indicators of malicious intent. So looking at things like keywords, wire transfer, the company employee database transferred somewhere. There's lots of different keywords that we can use to detect this. The display name, matching something within Active Directory. So that idea that they'll often register a Gmail address or a BigPond address and use that as a way to initiate the attack. Domain proximity, where they will register a domain very similar to one that you own, but maybe with one character changed or something that looks almost identical to the original. Again, we can pick that up. Domain activity, looking at a feed of legitimate versus non-legitimate traffic for a particular domain. And then the reply to address, so either the header or envelope address not matching the reply to address. All indicators. We generally see that if you see two of these, that's good enough to take some action. And often that'll be quarantining the email. So that idea that the security team, the IT team will quarantine it, make sure that it's safe before it gets delivered down, or the email just gets tagged. And I'll show you that in a moment. But that idea that the employee gets an email with the subject line saying suspicious message, and they can basically then, I suppose, scrutinize that email in a little bit more detail, make sure that it's safe for them to actually view. So how that looks is something like this, where you can see we've added suspicious message. You can see that we've also added a piece of HTML to the body of the email. Ours is fairly innocuous. In reality, we actually will often see people using bold writing, red writing to really draw attention to that. So that kind of covers off some of the, I suppose, the approach that we're seeing in terms of security, and that kind of, I suppose, using Moncast as a wraparound service for things like Office 365, where you're bringing in a security expert to provide that kind of peace of mind that compromise won't happen. The last really two parts then to what we call cyber resilience is that idea of, first of all, data assurance. And that idea that you need to be able to get back to the data. So regardless if you see human error, and so maybe somebody has forgotten to check the box saying you want to retain data through legal holds within O365, tech failure if something was to happen where the data gets deleted, or potentially malicious action on behalf of an end user. That idea of data assurance means that that data is always available and you can get back to it at any stage. And then business continuity is that idea that operationally, people need to continue sending and receiving emails regardless of an Office 365 outage or any other events that could potentially impact productivity within the business. So with Moncast at a really high level, the idea again is that we offer that wraparound service, that second layer for providing a highly secure and accessible archive. And we cover both what we, industry-wide would be called archiving, but also the compliance side of things as well, and we kind of serve those both from the same data set. And this is run out of 2 data centers, Tier 4 here in New South Wales. So basically the top-end DCs providing the service. Compliant obviously with Office 365, and the idea that we serve both the employee side of things, so productivity searches from an end user perspective, but also the admin side for e-discovery and mailbox management. So that's the kind of archiving side of things. I'll show what that looks like in a moment. to talk about continuity for a moment, and obviously, we're a huge supporter of Office 365 and the Microsoft environment. We're a Microsoft partner, but the reality is, like so many platforms, things can happen. And just to highlight that, last year on the 30th of June, there was a fairly significant outage for many of the American tenancies of Office 365 and the clients on those. What you really saw was an update of EOP caused an outage it was actually from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. US Eastern Standard Time. So the result there is obviously many businesses on the last day of quarter are without email services. So, it's that kind of thing that can happen. Australia has been really good, to be fair, but I suppose it's, that notion of best practice and risk management, making sure that your company's covered and, if anything does happen, you're okay. So with Moncast, again, the approach is that wraparound service. So, in this case, Office 365, where if something does happen and we lose connectivity, your end users can continue to send and receive emails using our Outlook plugin, which we'll show in a moment, or other tools. So our iOS device app, or Android app, where people in continuity mode can continue working, and really for many organizations, there's no real sense of anything has actually gone wrong at all. So a little bit of a demo there, kind of show you some of the end user side of things first, and then I'll flick over and look at some of the admin type stuff. So, one of the big requirements around that idea of data assurance and continuity is that in an event that end users can actually find their data. So for me, I can access the Moncast archive using our plugin. I can do a quick search here, type in Agencia and Travel, and immediately what you'll see is the Moncast search window will open. And I'm going to get all the results that match that from a perpetual immutable archives. So again, that peace of mind approach where it doesn't really matter in terms of what the end users can access. They can't delete any messages. So I have no option to delete a message here. I can, if I want to, interact with it. So for example, I can reply to this email, but the archive is perpetual. It's immutable. I don't get any ability to delete from it. So it's that kind of peace of mind approach. It does support lots of functionality, things like being able to search through your folder view, advanced searching using much more detail than I just did, so keywords, from, tos, date ranges. We can map the folder structure from your inbox to the archive, so from an end user perspective, just making it easier to use and a simpler kind of end user experience. So that's the archiving side of things. And very quickly then to show, I suppose, an example of what can happen in the event of an Office 365 outage. I'm going to simulate that. I'm going to click on a button here that says activate continuity. And what you'll see is down the bottom, I'm currently working offline. So essentially what that means is I have no connection to Office 365, but I can continue working and send an email to myself. I'll just use a demo email address here and say coffee in 10 minutes. When I click on send, even though I'm not connected to our Exchange server, see the message will sit in the outbox and essentially get sent via the Moncast platform, via HTTPS, so fully secure. But if I jump over here, I can click into that email and you'll see it's business as usual. Security still gets applied, and signatures, all the stuff that Moncast can do from a gateway perspective. So the admin side of that looks like this. So that idea of a basic archive search, for example, I can jump in here, and this is supported by a 7-second SLA. So as I run a search, you'll see that it actually comes back really, really quickly. Supports Boolean, supports my ability to drill into things like subject line, headers, body, etc. from to. I can click on search, and you'll see I can return the search results back into the window. So you can see there like 4,260 emails in less than a second, and that's due to the Moncast OS. It's a bespoke OS built around security and archiving, but is able to deliver those extraordinarily fast search results, and the ability to build obviously much more complex search criteria. So that's a single ad hoc search. In reality, people will generally want to stack their searches so that in the event of an outage or some tech failure, I can get back to my data at any point. I can jump in, I can run a stacked set of searches, and then I can do things like export them to a portable hard drive, make them available to legal, but it's that idea that regardless of what's happening with Office 365, my data exists here, and I can find it, I can go back to it. I don't need to worry about human failure, tech failure, or malicious actions. And then just to finish up, to talk to that idea of what do we do in the event of an outage, where that date on the 30th of June last year in the US, for Moncast customers, if that happens, really all they need to do is go to our continuity mode. So go to services, go to continuity, and instead of kind of panicking and thinking, well, our employees are not going to be able to continue working, I'm able to jump in here and actually just run a continuity event. So, my 365 outage, I can push it to particular AD groups. So for example, I'm working with a hybrid environment where I've got Exchange and I've also got Office 365. I can choose when to start it, what time zone, and that will automatically flick any end users that are sitting within the Outlook plugin or with the mobile devices into continuity mode, and they can continue working essentially as if it was business as usual. And then to finish up, just a really quick look at some of the kind of management style reporting that's available within Moncast. It's definitely one of the things we see a requirement around more and more, where the IT team, the security team needs to go to the board, needs to go to the exco and report back on exactly what's been happening from an email perspective. What are we seeing as far as attacks that are coming in? What do we need to maybe pay attention to? And that ability to schedule these reports so that not only is protection being provided, but you get this very nice schedulable review of weekly or monthly data around exactly what's happening from an email perspective. So you can see a kind of infographic approach, and often we see this used as an opening slide for the report back to the board, but drilling into a substantial amount of detail in terms of TLS, non-TLS, what are the top threats, the top rejection reasons. So a huge amount of valuable data that is available from within those reports. So given the time, I'm going to draw a line in terms of the demo there, and kind of, I suppose, to summarize, it's that idea that as we see people moving to the Office 365 environment, huge amount of benefits there, massive cost savings in terms of the reduction in requirements of on-premises hardware. The overhead and management is substantially reduced, but I suppose our point of view would be that the business requirement to provide security and data assurance and continuity still exists, and that's where we see a huge uptake of the Moncast services, that wraparound service for Office 365. So with that, we'll open it to any questions that have come through, and then I'll hand it back to Lincoln to wrap up. So we'll just be 1 second. I'm just going to pause the audio as we check the questions. So one of the questions we had then, obviously, the implementation time. It depends, I guess, on what is being rolled out, but generally, as we work with Brennan IT, we see an onboarding time anywhere between kind of 1 to 3 weeks, depending on resources that are available from the company that's onboarding the platform. That equates to probably 4 to 8 man-hours of work. And then there's various offerings that Brennan IT can talk to you guys about in terms of things like professional services, what we call Assisted Connect, etc. So lots of options there. The other question then was around data sovereignty. So we guarantee data sovereignty. So if people wanted to use us for that cyber resilience approach, the data never leaves Australia. It's built out of 2 DCs here. There's no failover out of region. So whether it's security, archiving, etc., that all gets serviced out of the local DCs. And we also have a cost per user question. What it suggests there is if you just drop your Brennan rep an email or contact them, this actually depends, unfortunately, is the answer to that. There's lots of different costs depending on what package you go to. in terms of, is it just security? Is it security with archiving? Is it continuity also? So I would say definitely contact your Brennan rep. Sorry, we've got a bunch of questions coming through here, so bear with me as I get to them. What are the consequences of a Moncast outage? Have there been recent large Moncast outages in the past? So I've been with Moncast 2 years. We had a degradation of service back in November 2015, and as soon as that happened, we immediately went out and spent, I think it was 1.5 million on upgrading perimeter network security, and there's a full analysis of that event and what we did to resolve it. Since then, nothing, and we do have a financially backed SLA around uptime. So we, in the case of any outage, if that was ever to happen, we do have we do have financial SLAs around that. Next question is, can you confirm how does Office 365 via Moncast send emails without internet through Outbox? So look, one of the requirements is that, like any email service, we definitely need internet connectivity to be able to send emails. Our plugin connects directly to our platform via HTTPS. So in the case of an Office 365 or Exchange outage, we're able to bypass that bottleneck, and then when the event is over, can despool those the sent and received emails back to Office 365 or Exchange or whatever the mail service might be. I'm just going to check for another question. Okay, so it looks like that's all the questions we've got in. So I'll hand over to Lincoln now, and he can do the wrap up on this session. And thanks for your time, guys. And again, really appreciate Brennan inviting us in to talk to you today.
Thanks, Gar. I hope that level of detail in the live demos left most of you reasonably wowed to the point that you're wondering why you don't have Moncast already. Look, I'd be naive to think that none of you have any type of email security in place today, but we ourselves have that as well internally at Brennan IT, but we recently moved to Moncast simply because it just was more fit for purpose than anything else in the market as far as email security was concerned. And as a big bonus, we have the archiving features and the business continuity features to use ourselves as well in the event that we need to restore emails, email data that is not natively there in the mailbox. And also in the event that we lose connectivity to the Exchange Online mailbox. And also keep in mind, if you're not already in Office 365, everything that's been said today is also relevant from your traditional on-premise Exchange server as well. So just in terms of scale for us, we have 300 employees. Daily we block about 25,000 emails through Mimecast, which translates roughly to around 80 to 85 malicious emails per user per day. Some of those were previously getting through. We were seeing impersonation attacks once or twice a day, very legitimate sounding emails going from the CFO to the CEO, asking for payment of an invoice, which all seemed very legitimate because it was from a supplier that was known to us, etc. So all those things have stopped, and we're really also benefiting from that. Please do reach out to us, your Brennan IT contact, or follow up via our website or the email that you'll receive. It's related this afternoon or tomorrow, and the user cost is a function of what you would like specifically, but compared to the cost of your per user cost of Exchange Online or Office 365, it is a proportion of that. So it is a very complementary product. If there's no other further questions which we can't see at the moment, thanks very much for your time. We hope that you found this valuable, and we'll talk to you soon.